coming to you from Whitehall, opposite 10 Downing Street in London, where, according to my calculations, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is due to make an appearance any minute now. It's been 6 months since he was in London for the King's coronation, which by Airbus Albo's standards is an absolute eternity. He's been to 13 other countries since then, or 14 if you include Australia. And you'd have to say, given the parlous state of British politics at the moment, Albo would feel right at home here. But do you get the feeling as you watch Albo flying around the world, hobnobbing with putative presidents and prime ministers, that none of those leaders is actually the one pulling the strings? Certainly none of them seems to be in control of excessive or illegal immigration, which is a global phenomenon now, and the violent consequences of it are painfully apparent on the streets of London, Melbourne and Sydney right now. Here is a curious coincidence from just last week. As the High Court of Australia delivered a decision that allowed 83 dangerous refugee criminals into the Australian community, the Supreme Court here deemed the British government's policy to send illegal migrants to Rwanda unlawful. Both of these judicial decisions go against the wishes and the welfare of the citizens of Australia and Britain, not to mention diminish the sovereignty of the Western civilisations that we inherited. But don't rely on your elected representatives to defend civilisation against the barbarism that indiscriminate immigration sometimes brings. Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak last week sacked his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, for expressing legitimate concerns about Muslims desecrating statues and calling for Jewish genocide on the streets of London. And here is how Anthony Albanese deals with the same issue.
I have a track record on this, and I'm proud of it. But I also have a track record of standing up for the rights and for justice of Palestinian people. And I make no apologies for being a consistent supporter of a two-state solution. Now, Jewish Australians are fearful at the moment. The sort of activity that is occurring is scaring them, and I stand with them. No one should threaten people because of their religion or their race in this country. But it is also the case that Arab Australians and Islamic Australians and women wearing hijabs in the streets of Sydney and Melbourne are being threatened, and I stand against that as well.
Like Sunak, Albo is frightened to call out the Islamic provocateurs of the violence because that would alienate key electorates. Whether that happens at the expense of social cohesion, let alone our civilisation, matters little to either of them. Well, some people might have been convinced by Albo's equivocation, but fewer people would be convinced by this.
And I make no apologies for trying to bring communities together, not divide them, because that's the role of political leaders. And at a time when there is social division, leaders have a choice. They have a choice to either bring people together or divide them, to either look for unity or look for opportunism. The idea of selective human rights is one that I stand against.
As for Anthony Albanese saying he opposes selective human rights, well, that's a bit rich. What was the voice to Parliament if it wasn't the selective human rights of one racial group over another? No wonder Albo's polls and popularity are slipping. The Australian people just aren't falling for it anymore.